And now, a continuation of Quantum Gate by Jane E. Hawkins, as read by the Plurality Report. Chapter 7. The briefing/simulation room had changed. The pew-like benches they'd been sitting on had slid into the walls on either side, while a large round platform rose from the center of the room. The simulator bay had 5 chairs, each facing a monitor. Sergeant Cranshaw strode forward to take up her position between them and the simulators. She was career military, second generation, and it showed in her economical and confident movements. She was also a fine-looking woman with dark curling hair and an athletic body. She reminded Griffin of the panther he'd seen stalking a fake jungle at the San Diego Zoo, and nearly everyone in the platoon had indulged in highly non-military thoughts about her from time to time. She knew it, but no one ever got under her guard. She exchanged a few quiet words with Lieutenant Andrews as the setup change to simulation base completed. Then he left and she looked at her platoon. They quieted immediately. "We'll be taking a look at all the battlefield and VR procedures," she said. "So pay close attention because this stuff is mission critical. Your lives will depend on it. The atmosphere of AJ-3905 uses chlorine like ours uses oxygen, and it's got enough organic hydrocarbons and fluorine compounds floating around in it to eat your brain while it eats your face. We're using standard CO atmosphere suits. They're fitted with..." Michaels broke in. "Just CO suits? That's bullshit! Why don't we get some augmentation? COs have no armor value at all." Griffin rolled his eyes, but Alonzo leaned forward, ready to back Michaels up. And when Griffin reminded himself, had Michaels ever been wrong about an equipment issue? The man was a flat mouth, but when it came to the tools of his trade, there was nobody better in the platoon, including, perhaps, Sergeant Cranshaw. "Sorry, Michaels, you're right, but I don't have the answer." "Well, maybe you should find out, Sarge." Michaels crossed his arms. "Yeah? Maybe you should shut your word hole." Alvarez laughed, but Michaels just looked superior. "I have made inquiries, Private Michaels," Sarge replied, "because it is important to me to keep my boys happy and healthy so that when they return from the battlefield they can service me in the fashion to which I have grown accustomed." She winked, and Griffin saw Whalen grinning at Hynek, who turned both pink and avid. "In your dreams, boy. Only in your dreams." "But my superiors in the UN have informed me that Beatrice's 23rd Armor does not call the shots around here." She raised an eyebrow at Michaels as though to ask if he thought they did. "The CO suits, inadequate as they may be, have been retroed with the latest VR augmentation top hats. Absolutely state-of-the-art. Complete heads-up, computer-assisted targeting and ranging. Complete window-in-a-window top-down of the combat zone. Cerebral cortex transmission coil, so the response time is very good." Michaels interrupted again. "We used those helmets in Belgium. They suck. I had a migraine for a week." Sarge looked at him. "Private Michaels, are you an expert in freaking everything?" Michaels gave her the happy grin of a proud 2-year-old. "Yeah, Sergeant. Pretty much I guess I am." "I find this very hard to believe." She pinned her black-eyed gaze on Griffin. "Private Griffin, do you think that Michaels is an expert on freaking everything?" Griffin squirmed. "No right answers here." "No, Sarge. I thought that was you." He smiled weakly at her, hoping she would see the ingratiating reply as a joke. Sarge nodded. "That's correct. I do know freaking everything. I know, for instance, that you and Private Michaels for the rest of the week are going to be pulling KP duty." "Come on, Sarge," said Griffin. "I didn't do anything." "Don't whine, soldier. It's very unbecoming." She arched an eyebrow at him. Griffin opened his hands in defeat. "Yeah, and getting covered with veggie machine muck was becoming. When was the last time you did it?" Sarge smiled as though she could read his thoughts and moved on with her briefing. Exposure to the atmosphere of AJ-3905 is extremely hazardous. The docs call it profoundly damaging. The effects are violent, painful, difficult to treat, and irreversible. Any breach of the CO suit would prove catastrophic. She looked each member of the platoon in the face. So, ladies, let's not get a run in your stockings, Michael said, which is why we need something a little warmer than just a CO suit. Hawkins burst out with, "Man, I wish you would give it a rest." Griffin flinched. What was it about Michael's that made it so easy for him to rile Hawkins, who was normally so calm? "Why don't you go flatline?" Michaels glared at Hawkins and clenched his right fist. Hawkins started toward him, but Crenshaw stopped him with a short chopping gesture. "Michaels, don't piss me off. We're going through with that one." Crenshaw looked at him steadily, her face not even angry as she waited to see what he would do. She didn't overtly move into either an attack or a defense posture, but something about the way she held herself reminded Griffin of her hand-to-hand combat prizes. Platoon rumor, which she neither confirmed nor denied, said that Sergeant Crenshaw hasn't lost a match in over 8 years. Griffin had once watched her take down a guy twice her size when she was so drunk she could barely stand. Michaels looked back at her for a long beat, then he crossed his arms and leaned back. Griffin wasn't the only platoon member who remembered to breathe in that moment. Sarge continued as though nothing had been said. "The VR in the top hats is keyed into brainwave and retinal activity, so it's the next best thing to being there. Targeting is handled automatically. Just look and lock. So everybody step up to the simulator bay. We've got 5 seats in the bay, so we'll be doing the runs with half the platoon at a time. Your training schedule has already been posted on Militerm. Check it after you leave. Don't make me come after you, or you'll have a rough session." She smiled, and Griffin remembered a past training run with a shudder. Crenshaw never held grudges, but if she didn't like what you did, she made sure you didn't like the consequences. "The UN wants us to spend at least 2 hours a day either in VR or on missions." 2 hours? What is this crap? Michaels again, of course. "We've been in training for months. We know the suits, we know the skivers. Why spend so much time zombified under a top hat?" "I know that's unusual, but keep in mind it is mighty freaking unusual to be on an alien planet. You'll be grateful for the training after the first bug attack. The UN has already been here for months, and they know what they're doing with this schedule." "Well, I just hope sickbay won't be stingy with the painkillers when I get my next migraine." "Oh, poor baby's little head might hurt," said Castle, and a snicker ran through the group. "You ever had a migraine?" "Every month, baby boy." "Knock it off, folks," said Crenshaw. "Migraines can indeed be a side effect of cortical stimulation. However, I'm sure you'll find the UN has improved the process vastly in the past year." She looked at Michaels. "And I'm also sure Dr. Mirren will be happy to soothe your fevered brow if you ask her nicely." Another laugh swept through the group, and Michaels joined in. His success with the ladies was sometimes resented and sometimes admired within the platoon. Castle claimed to have followed him around one evening, taking notes and trying to figure out how he did it. She joked about selective projective telepathy, which Griffin almost believed, having watched Michaels in action himself. Michaels said it was just, well, paying attention, and that had never worked for Griffin. "Now, sessions will be at least an hour long, and sometimes the full 2 hours. It depends on whether you make me happy with your performance. The first group will be Michaels, Hynek, Griffin, Lopez, and Hawkins. Tish, Alvarez, Whalen, Alonso, and Castle, you'll be next. You are at liberty until 1300 hours. Check out the base if you want, but keep in mind this is a high-security mission, and many areas are off limits. You can also passively observe sim runs via Militerm, or you can pass the time with Castle's mass allowance." Crenshaw grinned and Castle winked. Castle had a passion for poker. Gambling was technically banned on bases, but Crenshaw didn't much care if they kept the ante and the noise down. "One more thing. there's a welcoming reception at 1900. Wear your dress uniform, the group groaned. Knock it off, folks. You don't need to stay long. Okay, now you 5 take your seats, and the rest of you try to stay out of trouble. Chapter 8. Tish and the others left, while the remainder fanned out around the sim bay. The chairs were spare but surprisingly comfortable. Griffin's screen in front of him said, VR Display Systems, in blue letters against black. Oh goody, video games. He tapped the keyboard and a top hat slid over his head. He'd worn one before, but only for a few minutes at a time. They made keyboards and display screens, even 3D screens, completely superfluous. The intensity of the virtual reality was amazingly vivid, and he purely hated the first 10 seconds. The helmet's connectors tickled through his scalp, and he knew that almost microscopic threads were piercing his skull. The semi-alive worms would link into his sensory centers, usurping the optic, auditory, and other input nerves. The immense data transmission capacity of Top Hat's connectors would then take over his perceptions. Until the connection was complete, he was in an entirely black world, feeling his sense of touch, smell, hearing, and taste wink out. The VR software adapted to him and started feeding wait-state signals. He sighed with relief as some sense of having a body returned. He felt more than heard the rest of the platoon to find their places and engage. The darkness lighted up with static, then cleared. The run was on. He had the controls of a skiver under his hands. He was in flight. He grabbed the stick as the nose of his craft started to dip. Woof! This simulation setup sure made you start off fast. Where was he? The ground underneath was low rolling hills covered with scrubby brown vegetation that was deep black in places. The sky was mostly green but shot through with what looked like jet streams of boiling gold. What were the air currents like up there? He didn't think he wanted to find out. Look, everybody, stay on your toes. The ID display said that a Captain Hyomet was in charge of this sortie. Griffin wondered briefly if there was actually a person of that name on the base, and then he was too deeply into sim to wonder anymore. His heart pounded and his breath came fast. His skiver was hurtling along at over 200 clicks per hour. Griffin moved up past an approaching hill, trying to maintain an even 300 meters of altitude. The onboard computer system's orders were to stay low in order to spot bugs. Their opponents were good at camouflage and able to fool even the sensors if the distance was over 500 meters. The roiling gold and green of the sky passed over his head, daunting in its sickly strangeness. His proximity alarm began to beep and his ship's AP spoke. Alien proximity alert. No lock available. Where was it? He scanned but only saw the dark hills and that poisonous sky. The words, target mode, appeared on the right side of his screen. Alien presence. No lock available. Danger. Yeah. Tell me something useful. The beeping of the alarm made his hands shake. Take a deep breath. Focus. Where was the thing? Movement in the lower right corner of his screen. Yes! Something was moving along the ground, head bobbing, huge faceted eyes, and making a sound like cloth being ripped underwater. Gotta be the bug. Gaia, it was ugly. The targeting square appeared and he tracked in onto the bug. Just as it was about to disappear out the lower left of his screen, he fired. He was sure he'd missed it, but then the bubbling sound shifted to a high grating squeal. Nailed it. His heart rate accelerated with pure joy, and he whooped like a toxic siren. Okay, first kill registered. Freaking Michaels? Griffin started to answer angrily, but the other voice spoke first. No, Griffin. Yeah, Michaels might be the best shot in the platoon, but he wasn't the only one who could point a weapon around here. Mess of bugs in Sector QA. Griffin swooped down into a valley, feeling high from his skill. Show me those bugs. Hawkins came in on the comm line. I got a skiver strike called in. I'll cue Sector Joe's hoof it to Quadrant A. Griffin checked his map. He was in QH, headed down line. He pivoted his craft to the right, and another skiver roared past him just over his head. "Squash them bugs!" sang out a voice he couldn't place. Hynek? Was he just looking forward to it, or had he actually found some? Griffin leaned on the throttle and began to move forward again. This thing didn't have much acceleration, did it? Alien proximity alert. No lock available. The skiver had passed him, was now on hover. It began firing into the ground just past the next hill. Griffin once again heard the shrieking sound of a bug's swan song. "Wiped out that mess." Definitely Hynek, sounding nearly as high as Griffin had felt a few minutes earlier. How many had he gotten? Well, Griffin could catch up with the hick boy. We're headed for the East's Quad. East Quad? Where was that? Someone had forgotten to use the right coordinate system. Geez, a couple hundred over there. Hundreds! That's where Griffin wanted to be. He began to accelerate again. "Squash them bugs!" He swung toward the left flank of the next hill, a little low to the ground, trying to catch up, and his proximity alarm began the nerve-grating beep again. Danger. Alien proximity alert. No lock available. An arrow appeared on his screen, pointing to his right. He pivoted his craft and saw a huge bug cresting the hill. Alien presence. No lock available. His targeting system came up, forming a red square. He tried to center it on the bug. Fire! The tracer showed a clean miss. The bug was coming at him. He moved his target, fired again, and fired once more. It was so big. How could anything alive be so disgusting? He fired once more, and the tracer went underneath the thing as it leapt at him. His screen blasted into static, and then went blank. The top hat lifted off his head, and he leaned back in the chair. He was trembling, and he reeked of fierce sweat. For a couple of deep breaths, he didn't know where he was. He found himself checking out his body, looking for injuries. Simulations didn't usually get to him that hard. Those bugs, that sky. Griffin shuddered at the thought of facing those things in real life. The rest of his platoon was still under simulation, their heads obscured by the top hats, their hands jerking and their muffled words occasionally almost audible. He could go into standby mode and watch the run play out. Nah. He just wanted to sit quiet, breathe a while. After about 10 minutes, the run was over. Hynek and Lopez had been disabled by bugs, but none of them were rated as kills. So 3 team injuries and over 150 bug kills. He glanced at Sergeant Cranshaw. It was her policy to tell them they hadn't done well enough, but he caught a gleam of pride in her eyes before she told them to do another run, and get it right this time. Griffin leaned forward. His heart began to pound again, even before the top hat had settled over his head. Chapter 9. The platoon ran simulations for nearly 2 hours, and Griffin felt like he had been in the helmet for days. By that time, they were regularly getting kill rates of 400 with no injuries. Even Cranshaw was willing to admit that wasn't bad. It had been fun, more than fun, really. Griffin was astonished by the intense exaltation of killing those grotesque things. He also felt if he had to make another run, he would just plow his simulated skiver straight into a mountain. "Okay, folks," said Sarge. "That's an improvement. Required time for today is now over. Same time, same place tomorrow. If you want added time to practice, the sim bay will be open every day from reveille to lights out, so just check with Militerm and see if it's booked." Hynek was already on his way out of the room. Lopez and Hawkins stared at Griffin with impatience, evidently planning to go another round, but he pushed his top hat into the lock mode. The computers could fill in gaps in a platoon with additional simulation, but everyone knew that made the runs more predictable. He shook his head. He shoved back his chair, stood, and stretched. His reflexes had been okay under sim, but his body still didn't seem to fit right. Neither did his mind. Indenture, environmental Armageddon, weird behavior from a top sci-tech, and outlandish bugs on an alien planet. Was any of this for real? He ran his hands over his face and forced himself to move forward. Regs said that they were all supposed to report to sickbay within the first 24 hours. This seemed like as good a time as any, given how lousy he felt. Maybe the doc had stuff that would help. A nice dose of reality would be fine for starters. He strode out of the simulation room as though he knew what he was doing and took the lift back to the second floor. Gaia, this place was dark. The only bright spot was the lift atrium. The rest was endless empty corridors with conduits and support girders unmasked in splotches of light marking the doorways. Where were all the people? What were they doing? He palmed for entry into sickbay and walked into a surprisingly well-equipped miniature hospital. Scanners, PCM, hold booths, and if that projection system was what he thought it was, then he'd never seen better. Impressive. Must be a pleasure to work with such great equipment. He'd done shifts in an ER during med school, but that was in a nearly collapsed section of Los Angeles. Nothing worked except the staff, and most of them looked like they would fall over if they could remember how. This clean and quiet place barely seemed like a medical facility to him. Hynek was there ahead of him, talking to a woman with an MD caduceus on her uniform. The doctor had soft, wild hair, big eyes, full lips, and a body that did amazing things to the standard medical uniform. Whoa! Damn. Maybe I should mention I was a medical student. Griffin found himself involuntarily giving her a solid up-and-down look, something that had always bugged him when other guys did it to Jenny. He doubted this lady minded either. She had at least one more button undone on the front than was needed for comfort. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall to watch her. "All right, soldier," she said to Hynek. "You may put on a robe. They're in the alcove." Hynek blinked. You want me to take my clothes off?" "Yes. Is there a problem?" She was holding a clipboard computer and looking at him with friendly but tired patience. Well, no, it's just right here." He gestured around him and managed to look both embarrassed and eager. "No, soldier," she smiled a little. "You may use the examining room." She pointed toward her right. "Oh, yeah, sure, of course." "Privacy Bay 2, said the doctor, and an oblong of light and metal extended from above to enclose the examining table. She turned it toward Griffin and gave him a pleasant smile. "All right, soldier, what's your name?" "Griffin. Andrew Griffin." Her hair fell slightly into her eyes as she bent over her clipboard. He found himself wondering if it was as soft as it looked. The woman just oozed sex. He hadn't had thoughts like this in so long he'd been wondering if he ever would again. "Marie, status on Griffin?" The nurse, a big dark woman with Lucas on her ID badge, didn't even look up. "He needs to be looked at." The doctor shook her head. "Do you have that entire list memorized?" "There are only 11 of them. It ain't brain surgery," said the nurse tartly, yet it was easy to see she was pleased. Griffin had a feeling the two had been working together for a long time. The doctor smiled at Griffin and he felt his breathing speed up. Look at that woman's lips. "Good thing for you. Get a robe." She turned toward Bay 2. Griffin started to watch her walk away, but realized the nurse was grinning at him. His ears got hot. He went to a cubicle, pulled the curtains shut behind him, and began taking off his uniform. The flimsy little room was a standard hospital changing room, just like one he and Jenny had occasionally used during medical school. Making love in a room this small was sometimes more funny than hot. You couldn't lie down and the walls were so flimsy you couldn't lean up against them. They'd struggled to find positions that would work and struggled even harder not to laugh out loud and call attention to themselves. Griffin smiled at himself in the mirror, seeing Jenny's hair shaking as she giggled. That was before the arguments started, when things were easy and sweet. They had barely ever even gotten annoyed with each other for nearly a year. It was a joke between them. How could you get mad or stay mad when the sex was so good? One touch and nothing else mattered. He could remember their first argument so well. Too well. You'd think it would have been over something like, "You're not paying enough attention to me." But no. That wasn't Jenny. She was different. She always was. She was the sweetest, smartest woman he had ever met. She was the best lover he'd ever had. She was equally passionate about everything that concerned her. He hadn't realized how many directions that could go. The game had been due to start in less than 5 minutes, and he wanted to watch it. He'd known before that she didn't care for football, but that day she'd gotten angry. Very angry. She wore a white top that was nearly off her shoulders, and her soft blonde hair was pulled back into a loose knot. The curling tendrils waved gently in the artificial breeze as she leaned against the wall. The screens and machinery of their apartment building's enclosed courtyard made it almost feel like a sunny day outside. The light was a little dim, but they were all getting used to that these days. She was walking away from him as he spoke. He longed to stroke her smooth neck, even as his irritation grew. "What is the big deal about the sticks? They're wearing more padding these days." She turned to face him, and her eyes were dark with anger. "It's animalistic. I hate that, Drew." She looked away as though she couldn't stand the sight of him. "I hate that game, and I hate the fact that you watch it." Her right hand thudded into her left. "The whole thing was bad enough before, but now they've all these new rules. It's pathetic, and you know what makes it more pathetic? All these people are starting to flock to it." "Gaia, Jenny, calm down. It's just a game." Griffin looked at his watch. 3 minutes to go. "This is not a game, damn it. That's my point." She looked at him with anger and pleading on her face. "You know what I did on my shift last night? I helped a doctor put 17 staples into a 6-year-old's skull. And do you know why? Do you know what happened? His 14-year-old brother hit him with a football stick. We're learning how to be doctors, Drew. We're learning how to save people. But we live in a society hooked on violence, and it hurts me to see you become like that." He'd blown his stack. Even now he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was just because the game was starting soon and he knew she'd leave if he got angry. "How can you possibly compare a sport to dumb kids who hurt each other?" he said, the sneer clear in his voice. "I can't believe you're trying to tell me that watching a game is like saying all the bad craziness is okay. Don't you tie me to that. I've had it with people trying to tell me I'm responsible for everything that goes wrong in the world. I'm not, and I am going to watch the game." She hadn't answered. She had just looked back at him for a few long seconds, then turned her back and walked away. As he watched her head for the compound's airlock, he almost changed his mind. Almost said, "I'm sorry," almost agreed not to watch the game. This was the finest woman he'd ever met. How could he let her walk away from him? He hesitated, and the airlock had cleared her for exit. The inner door closed. He watched her reclaim her protective gear, and then she was walking down the LA street, away from the small apartment they had called home. He hadn't even asked her where she was going or when she would be back. He turned and went back into their apartment. His team had won. Griffin carefully hung his uniform on a hook and put on the bright green robe. She had come back and he had apologized, but good things between them were injured. He didn't understand it. He hated it. He tried to pretend it wasn't so. It was. When he pulled aside the cubicle's curtain, the nurse was standing just outside. She batted her eyes at him extravagantly. The color looks nice on you." Griffin laughed. "You think so?" he said in a squeaky voice. "I thought it kind of washed me out." She laughed with him, then gestured toward the examining table. He roosted himself on the edge of the table, waiting for the doctor. The privacy screen rose from Bay 2, where Hynek was being examined. Griffin recognized the machine from medical school, a Jensen Ultra. "That's very nice." Hynek was facing the sexy doctor and smiling a shit-eating grin. "Say ah," said the doctor and looked into Hynek's mouth. His old instructor had always said, bedside manner can be very important. This doctor had a nice manner, but one that made you want to get into bed with her. Probably not what his instructor meant. "I don't see any redness or feel any swelling." Her face was sympathetic. Hynek's gaze dropped to her chest. Griffin rolled his eyes, unnoticed by either of them. "How long has it been bothering you?" she said in a kind voice. Hynek was still staring at her chest. What?" he said. "I said, how long has it been bothering you?" Her voice was, if anything, still more sympathetic. Oh, a couple of days? Uh-huh. She used her stylus to make a note on her clipboard. What's your first name? Doctor, she said, and her smile became positively toothy. Griffin snickered. Listen, I just can't see anything. Is it really bad? Her voice dripped with sympathy. Uh-oh, Hynek, she is so on to you. Yeah, it's kinda bad. Uh-huh. Hey, I hear you from San Diego. You do you? Her smile was as bright as ever, and Griffin tried not to laugh out loud. Yeah, and where are you from? Tucson. Any other symptoms? No, just a sore throat. Ears bothering you? She tilted her head, eyes on the private's face. Nah, I have an out in San Diego. Oh, you do you? Still smiling. Yeah. She leaned forward slightly. Well, I think we should get together sometime and you can tell me all about that. Hynek had been looking at her chest again. He looked into her face, startled. He smiled like he was a 3-year-old who'd just gotten exactly what he wanted for Christmas. Really? Well, I'd like that. I'll bet. Marie, would you come in here for a moment, please? Listen, about your sore throat. Oh, it feels better already. I'm sure it does, but just to be safe, Marie, 500 units of B12, please. She faced the private, smiling, ever smiling. Hynek finally started to look nervous, and Griffin bit his lip to keep from laughing. I think you're going to need a shot. Oh, man, not a shot. Yes, she said in a slow drawl, a shot. I hate shots. Yes, I'm sorry, but I think you're going to need a shot. A really big shot. Can't you do a spray? Sorry, soldier, but this amount of B12 can't be administered that way. It was a bald-faced lie, but Hynek didn't know better. She went on. It won't hurt much. She was still smiling, but Hynek wasn't. The nurse was already there, holding up a syringe the size of a turkey baster. Griffin wrapped his arms around himself, shaking with silent laughter. That was not a standard needle. Bend over, buttercup, said the nurse, waving her needle. As Hynek slowly moved into position, the privacy screen came down again. The doctor sauntered over to where Griffin was sitting, looking pleased with herself. Privacy Bay 3, she said, and the barrier slid down around them. Hi, I'm Dr. Mirren. Griffin, right? Yes. How do you feel, Andrew? I feel fine, he heard himself say in a high voice, and winced at the obvious lie. Good. It's just common practice for me to check on all the new arrivals, make sure everything is okay. Sometimes the gate can make you feel a little woozy for a couple of days, so just to be sure, I'm going to give you a really big shot. Griffin gaped at her. Oh, no, not a shot. No, she said, answering the thought that must have been obvious from his face, and laughed. Just kidding. But I am going to give you a quick scan. She gestured toward the control panel to her left, and the auto-dock field ran down him like a standing wave of light. He felt a flash of warmth and prickles, then light had passed. Okay, you're all done. She looked up and began taking notes of a readout near the top edge of the privacy enclosure. Was that a Jensen Ultra? She looked surprised. Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? Then she nodded. You were in med school, weren't you? Yep. His mother, stirring her coffee, looking at him skeptically. You want to be a neurosurgeon? She thought neurosurgery was just something he was doing only to please Jenny. Maybe she'd been right. Of course she'd been right, Griffin thought, and he'd run away from medical school, just as he'd run away from everything else in his life. Griffin swallowed. 3rd year, he told the doctor. Most washouts happened the 1st year or the last, and he didn't want Dr. Mirren thinking he'd simply failed. Yet running away was failure, wasn't it? UT, right? Yeah. Now, how'd she know that? I guess she looked at my file. It's a good school, she said absently, writing down another observation off the Jensen's readouts. She turned back and gave him a friendly smile. A little lunch will probably make you feel a whole lot better. It's just the lag. Griffin smiled ruefully. Sure didn't fool her, did I? She knows I feel lousy. Listen, if you don't feel better by this afternoon, come see me again. So you can give me a big shot? A really big shot. But only if you want to play games during working hours, she laughed. He raised an eyebrow. Thinking about non-working hours, she winked and walked away. He hiked himself down off the table and walked across the room to change back into his uniform. Hynek was back in his uniform and on his way out, rubbing his butt and looking more confused than pissed. Poor guy still wasn't sure what hit him. Griffin dumped his hospital gown in the recycler and pulled on his fatigues. As he twitched the curtains aside, he could see the doctor over by the nurse's station, talking to Marie Lucas while she worked at the computer. She waved at him, then said a few inaudible words to Marie. The nurse's grin was vivid against her dark face as she nodded at him on his way out. Chapter 10. Griffin found his way to the mess hall. Hynek was complaining to Lopez and Hawkins about his shot. "I tell you, I won't be able to sit down for a week." Griffin could believe it. He covered his smile with a hand and walked quickly toward the mess hall order station. That needle would have been about right for a horse. Dr. Miron must have special ordered it. Or maybe it was the nurse's idea. That grin on her face as she told Hynek to bend over had been pretty impressive. Griffin got an order of bratwurst from the ridiculously cute mess hall AP and looked for a place to sit. Dr. Marks sat alone, staring at a wall. She didn't see him as he approached. She reached into a pocket and pulled out a battered box of cigarettes. Griffin remembered his mother hassling him about smoking, but something more than that made him pause. They were in a station on an alien planet, he thought. An alien planet where the atmosphere was highly toxic, which meant that the station's air couldn't merely be purged and replaced, not even with scrubbed outside air, which meant that smoking regulations should be identical to the smoking regulations aboard the Copernicus station or moon base, or any other totally sealed vessel. Forbidden. Against regs. But Dr. Marks not only lit her cigarette right there in the public mess hall, but did it in front of a full ashtray. And Griffin suddenly needed to know why. That, on top of everything else, drove him the remaining meters toward her table, but he stopped again when she looked up at him. She looked pallid, exhausted, and at the end of a rope. He froze, looking at that flat and lovely face, and wanted to reach out for her, take her to sickbay, tuck her into her own bed, do something to relieve the anguish that so obviously just lived below her skin. "Excuse me, can I borrow a cigarette?" he blurted out and then flinched inside. Oh yeah, smooth way to start a conversation. She didn't respond immediately, and he almost decided to just slink away and pretend that he hadn't said anything. Then she smiled slightly. "Certainly. Here." She handed him the cigarette she just lighted, stood and left. Strange. Very strange. He sat down and looked at the cigarette, then stubbed it out, thinking about how she had behaved during the briefing and the conversation he had overheard with Colonel Sanders. This was a lady with trouble on her mind, but what was it? She was going to save the world, her and that fusion washing process. Seems like she should be very happy. Maybe she was just upset that the world hadn't wised up sooner. Mom had said much the same, as Marx implied during the briefing, that just a little action 50 years ago would have been a lot better. Hundreds of thousands of species had been lost from the ecosystem in the last 100 years. How many, no one would ever know for certain. In the last 50 years, as many humans had died from indirect or direct effects of the ever-increasing pollution. It must hurt to look at that as a scientist and know how unnecessary it all was. Still thinking about Dr. Marx's odd behavior, Griffin cut off a chunk of bratwurst and bit into it. Then he looked at the remaining piece on his fork in stunned surprise. Good grief, how could you make sausage come out that dry? Military food never failed to astonish him. He chewed grimly. Well, Dr. Miron said food might make him feel better. She hadn't said it needed to be good food. He swallowed the mouthful, chased it with a sip of the dreadful coffee, then dutifully took another bite. Hynek walked out, and Griffin saw that Lopez had gone to the food control panel. As the large man turned around, holding a tray, Griffin waved to him. He came over and sat down across from Griffin. So, Hynek isn't too happy. Lopez rolled his eyes. I was there when Nursey got out the needle, Griffin continued. If he told you it was big, he wasn't giving you a line. Lopez laughed and took a bite of his sandwich, then froze, not even chewing. Griffin laughed. Pretty bad, eh? Said Griffin, and Lopez nodded. But it is a perfectly balanced, nutritious meal, Griffin continued in a high sing-song. Hawkins slid his tray onto the table next to them, looked at Lopez's face, and grinned. Lopez chewed and forced himself to swallow. Save me from nutrition. Is there anything that looks edible around here? Besides the doctor, said Griffin. Is she really that good-looking? Fissionable. Maybe it's time for my checkup, Hawkins said, still smiling. It'll brighten up your day just to see her, let me tell you, Griffin told him. But don't be out to get anything. She's the kind who smiles sweetly and gets even if you waste her time. Hell, I don't want to get anything. Got my honey and my kids back home, but Ellen never made me promise not to look. She says if she'd wanted to marry a eunuch, she would have found herself one. Griffin felt his face freeze. Jenny. He'd asked her to marry him, asked her to promise to stay with him always, and the first time she'd had any real trouble, he'd turned and ran, on reflex, without a word, without looking back. Hey man, you okay? Lopez was looking at him with concern. Yeah, I'm fine. Well, maybe a little woozy. Doc says they call it gait lag. Maybe I'll see if I can catch a few zibs. Griffin stood and picked up his tray. Hawkins obviously didn't buy the story, but he didn't push it either. You'll sure be needing the beauty sleep. You're on KP all week, remember? What a friend. Yeah, I remember. Hawkins started to say something else, then thought better of it, probably getting set to rag on Michaels. Michaels never hesitated much about trashing Hawkins, but Hawkins pretty much kept his mouth shut once he found out Griffin was friends with him. Jenny had that kind of ethics. But thinking of Michaels made him think about Michaels' paranoid theories, and he slowly put his tray back and leaned over it. Hawkins was probably the sanest and most stable member of the patrol. The dark man raised his eyebrows and looked at Griffin curiously. Lopez chewed doggedly on his sandwich, watching them both with curiosity. Hey, Hawk, Griffin said. Did you see Doc Marks smoking in here earlier? Hawkins nodded silently. If we are in a sealed station, if the air outside is so damn toxic, then how come she gets away with smoking? She's brass, Hawkins said with a shrug. Maybe, but what about how strung out she looks? Or that stuff about indenture? And listen, Hawkins, Griffin leaned forward. You been sleeping well lately? But Hawkins pushed back from the table and stood shaking his head. I don't think about it, and I'm not gonna think about it, he said. Listen, Griffin, my family needs the money. I signed up for 5 years and I'll serve them, and I'll be the best goddamn soldier I know how to be, but I'm not buying into any theories, do you hear me? I don't ask questions, I just do my job, and in 5 years, I'm out of here with enough cash to send my kids through school. He looked at Griffin seriously. You do the same, kid. Forget about the crazy stuff and just do your job. It's the only way to go. Griffin stared after him. He knew it was good advice. He knew that he ought to take it, that a month ago he would have taken it. And he also knew that, for some reason, this time around, he just couldn't leave well enough alone. Chapter 11. The veggie machine in the kitchen, a gleaming chrome tube, stood at least 2 meters in diameter and easily 4 meters long. Standard issue Klaushout processor, though pretty big for the size of this base. Terrific machines, but why they couldn't have been designed to be self-cleaning was a mystery. Michaels was staring at it in disgust, and a balding man in a cook's uniform stared, in turn, at Michaels. Griffin looked at the man dubiously and winced as Cookie nodded at him. The man did not look sane. All right, boys, let's get going. KP is still KP. You know what KP stands for? Keep peeling, said Griffin. That's correct. You're a very smart man, said Cookie. Michael started grinning. He collected eccentricities, and Griffin could tell that he was about to add a fine specimen to his hoard. That machine here, which you two will have the honor of cleaning, can prepare a full meal for 100 men in less than an hour. You believe that? He looked at Griffin intensely, as though the question mattered. Griffin shrugged. Yes. You do? I don't. He laughed with manic cheerfulness. When I was on TV. Did you know I was on TV? No. Me neither. The cook laughed at his own joke for quite a while, showing large white teeth. Griffin sighed and exchanged glances with Michaels, who looked more and more delighted. The short man calmed himself. No, really, I was on TV. I had my own show. You believe that? I was the star, Interactive Cable Channel 47. 4.5 years I was on that damn show. It was great. I loved it. I had a lot of fans. Lots of them. His eyes gleamed. Cars, booze, a house in the Bahamas. Lots of women fans. Yeah, and they probably just loved the way you flipped a crepe. As if the man had heard Griffin's skeptical thoughts, he stopped suddenly and said, You believe that? This time, the cook made the mistake of focusing on Michaels, who looked at him steadily over his folded arms and said, No. The cook's face abruptly turned sad. He said, Hey, watch it, as though Michaels had swatted a fly with a crystal vase. His eyes grew shifty as he searched for another story to tell them, and then he gave up. All right, boys, clean her up good, he said curtly and walked away. Michaels plucked 2 cleaning rods off the processor's rack and handed one to Griffin with a sardonic smile. A quick twist extended the rod, and the glowing ball of the D-stat field appeared at the end. As Griffin got his going, Michaels went to the far end of the machine and began moving the rod down the side of the machine in steady strokes. Griffin could hear soft thuds from the inside of the machine as encrusted food paste fell away from the surface. The trick was to move moderately fast and very smoothly, so the semi-hardened goo would peel off from the inside in one large chunk with each stroke. After they did a pass from the outside, they would have to crawl in and get what remained. A steady hand on the D-stat could leave the inside nearly as shiny as the outside in one pass. Michaels was a real expert at KP. By the heavy sound of the falling clumps, he was getting nearly everything. Griffin took up position on the other end of the machine and began scraping, moving towards Michaels. Griffin had gotten a lot more experience at processor cleaning by hanging around with the guy, but it would still probably take him years to match Michaels' skill. The rank smell from the veggie machine filled the air as the charged rods forced paste away from the walls. A veggie machine could turn nearly any organic matter into nearly any kind of food. The food would be perfectly nutritious and individually concocted to suit the metabolism of each person, as recorded during sickbay exams. The problem was getting it to taste anything but its basic component ingredients. The cookie, for his last base, could pull off that trick. She had an array of flavor and scent bottles which she would snag apparently at random while the machine grunted and hummed, making cheese taste not just like cheese, but like Munster or Swiss. She also knew how to tinker the textures with amazing precision. She could have made mud taste and chew like filet mignon. As he rubbed the machine down, Griffin thought about meals he'd eaten during his digital terrorism training, and his mind started drifting until he worked in a blank haze. A sound penetrated the haze. Griffin blinked, surprised to find his own face, blue eyes too wide and mouth open, staring back at him from the curved side of the veggie machine. "Griffey? You okay, man?" Griffey looked at Michaels. Only a few yards separated the two men. Yeah, I guess I just kind of drifted off there." Griffin blinked and shook his head. "I guess I'm still tired, or whacked out from the gate, or something." "Yeah, or something," Michaels repeated darkly. "No, don't do it," Griffin said. "I'm tired, man, I'm fried, whatever it is, I don't want to hear about it." "Come on, man. This is important, it'll only take a minute." The man's narrow, tough face was serious, and Griffin sighed. Michaels took that for assent. "I don't know what's going on around here, but this stuff they're just shoveling isn't going down with just one swallow." "What are you talking about?" "All this BS about a mining operation. Do you have any idea how much of this stuff it'd take to have any effect on the atmosphere?" "Huh. I didn't know you had a degree in geoengineering." Griffin started working again, making more noise than necessary. "You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this stuff out. I was talking to the mechanic earlier." Michaels paused and leaned against his scraper. "There's only one mechanic here. In the whole damn motor pool, there's only one mechanic. They're gonna dig up enough of this ore to fix the entire planet, and there's only one mechanic here?" Michaels looked at Griffin. his face angry and tense. Reflexively, Griffin stopped scraping and looked back. He had seldom seen Michaels get so upset over something that wasn't a card game or target practice. "In some bogus sci-fi cheese fest, maybe," said Michaels. "But Jesus, man, I mean, this is reality, man, and there's no way they're gonna dig up enough rock to make this scheme of theirs work." Michaels began working with his scrubber again. Only one mechanic? Well, that did seem strange. Most bases had at least 5, working on alternating shifts. Acids in the air and more complex toxins in the rain made equipment breakdown rate in most unpopulated areas very high. Griffin frowned. Was it what Sarge said about the atmosphere? A combination of chlorine and fluorine? Uh-huh, Michaels said. So you can figure what that would do to O-rings and intake valves and every other goddamn thing. He swiped angrily at the tank. Griffin heard a long, wet thud as goop fell off the side of the veggie machine. "What about the VR displays they're using?" Michaels continued, putting down his scrubber again. "I've used those cerebral cortex coils before. That is scary shit, man." He stared at Griffin. "The CO said the first group out here was the EC-3rd Airborne." "Yeah," said Griffin. "I heard that." "So where are they?" Michaels said. Griffin was surprised by the note of genuine fear in the man's voice. Michaels claimed to have been nearly everywhere and done almost everything. Near as Griffin could tell, this was close to true. Not much seemed to flap him. Even the quantum gate had made him look more interested than alarmed. Almost against his will, he found himself listening to Michaels. "When I was in Belgium, I don't know," Michaels moved his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I could swear the VR was not accurate. I still don't know what the hell I was shooting at. They gave you a drug." Griffin remembered a lecture from med school, the instructor talking about an experimental VR enhancement drug. He'd said, "Addiction is a very real threat." What else had he said? Weren't there some odd side effects? Then Griffin shook his head sharply. "Listen to you," he said. "You sound paranoid. They can't give us drugs unless we know about it. It's in the contract. Don't go off the deep end, Michaels. Yeah, I agree this place is strange, but they're not going to blow off the contract. Not the UN. Michaels looked at him for a long second. "All right, fine, whatever. In a couple of days you'll stop dreaming, then you'll believe me." Michaels went back to work. When they finished the outside, they sealed both ends of the machine and opened the cloacal valve, and Michaels pushed the flush buttons. The kitchen filled with the wet, sucky noise of veggie paste disappearing. To where? Griffin didn't want to think about it. When the flushing stopped, they opened up the far end of the processor and crawled inside for an inspection. Griffin's half was, as he expected, a lot more work to finish. Michaels was long gone by the time he got it done. As he worked inside the stinking, clanging tube of metal, Griffin tried to think about the simulation runs instead of what Michaels had said. He hadn't joined Beatrice to think, but Michaels' last comment haunted him. No dreams. A couple of days and you'll stop dreaming. That, he remembered, was the major side effect of the VR enhancement drugs. Cessation of REM sleep. No dreams. Chapter 12. By the time Griffin was done cleaning the processor, he smelled like one. He made his first trip to the small bathroom off his room and got a profound shock. He couldn't find the scrubber controls, so he began punching buttons and twisting knobs at random. Why didn't they mark these things? After being blasted with hot air, watching the toilet appear and disappear, getting doused with an unpleasantly intense antiseptic of some sort, and confronting an absurdly enlarged image of his own nose, a set of holes in the ceiling doused him with water. He slapped the valve shut, profoundly shocked. Water? The chemical and biological toxin levels of most water was so high that a shower could kill you if it wasn't run off refined water. And who could justify washing with the stuff of life itself? Water showers were illegal in most countries, though he had heard that forking over major money could cause apparently disabled fixtures in certain old hotels to suddenly become operational again. He examined the cubicle walls again. There wasn't even an outlet for a sonic cleanser, but there was a grated drain in the floor and an opening in the ceiling. As he looked at it, a drop of water formed and fell onto his face. He twisted the knob back on, and a steady stream of warm water poured down over his head. He watched in horror as it disappeared into the floor beneath his feet. The potable water situation on AJ-3905 must be a lot different than it was on Earth, where they wouldn't have a water shower in an army private's quarters. Still, the thought of using it to clean dirt off his body seemed perverse. So many people were slowly dying of thirst that the World Health Organization had dreamed up a stupid name for it, CWDS, as if anyone alive didn't know what chronic water deprivation syndrome really meant. Now he had quantities flowing over his skin that could get a man killed in half the major cities of the world. How could there be so much safe water on a planet with an atmosphere that could eat your face? Next to the knob that controlled the water was a tube of soap. He squeezed some out, and he used it to scrub himself. It was very awkward. There must be a trick to getting soap smeared around before the water sluiced it off, but he didn't know what it was. He wound up feeling like a standard brushing unit would have gotten him cleaner. Still, the water flowing over his shoulders and down his back was the most pleasurable thing he had felt in months. He shut off the shower, watching with slightly sickened satisfaction as the last of the water disappeared into the drain below his feet. He hit a button he'd found earlier and now knew how to use. The hot air blasts left him dry and only a bit shuddery. He'd have to check around a bit and find out if there was a more standard cleaning device in his bathroom. For now, he was passably clean. He pulled fresh fatigues from the dispenser and put them on, trying to decide what he wanted to do. Talk with Michaels had left him feeling restless, as though all the suspicions he'd slowly been feeling were taking some shape that he couldn't quite put his finger on, and that he didn't quite trust. He snapped his fingers. He hadn't seen any of the base's skivers yet, and maybe he could get into the hangar and check them out. And, while he was there, he could talk to that mechanic and see what was up. The promise of flying time had been a big plus with this assignment. He wished that they mentioned he would be flying through poison gas, but these days that was pretty close to the situation on Earth as well. If the air-based simulation runs were accurate, flying here wouldn't feel noticeably different from flying at home, and the number of sudden thermals was far less. Griffin headed toward the lift. Once again, he saw no one and met no one, and it spooked him. Every military base he'd been on before rang with noise night and day. Right now, he could hear occasional distant booms and clatters, mostly from the mess hall, but no voices. The lift's whine was almost shocking in its volume as he took it down to the first floor. The halls, with their overarching struts and energy-woven floors, reminded him again of how tough the space was. He had probably never been in a building that could take as many hits as this one could. The hangar held only 2 skivers, both Gamelon-class cruisers that could transport 20 people or be run completely via wire. Beautiful machines. He looked at them a moment and remembered Saunders talking about the added troops they expected soon. And only 2 skivers. Perhaps there were more somewhere else, he thought. Perhaps there was a different base, a second station on AJ-3905. And with that thought, a sudden cool relief came over him. Of course, this had to be it. They were in a startup station, or perhaps just the entry station, and the rest of the operation, the real heart of this expedition, was elsewhere, with miners and skivers and troops and hallways that rang with movement and life. They just hadn't mentioned it. That was all. Griffin smiled and felt his shoulders relaxed for what seemed like the first time in months, and he turned his attention back to the skivers. Perhaps there were only 2 of them, but they were beauties. This was going to be fun. Diffused power outriggers were arranged in racks against the far wall, looking like the bombs they potentially were. The skiver on his right was locked, but the main entry hatch of the one on his left rised open as he approached. He climbed aboard. The main hold looked stripped down, with no seats and no cargo latches. He was impressed. The walls had to be memory-enhanced, capable of producing whatever outfitting was needed for a given mission. At the tail end was a set of airlocks and a huge door that looked like it could fit a meta-tank. The front end had the control cockpit. He climbed into the pilot's chair and ran his hands over the touch-sensitive surfaces. Basic readings answered: air pressure, wind speed, and engine temperature. He smiled as the skipper told him he was standing still and his engine was cold. What else, eh? He gave the warm-up section a tentative tap, and nothing happened. Good. Probably passworded. After, he climbed out and stood admiring the sleek beast. He heard a small noise from the far end of the hangar. He walked forward, and the door opened in front of him. A man in a mechanic's uniform and cap bent over a workbench, the lamp above spreading a ray of light over him. A curious clutter of objects filled the shelf behind him. Some were tools, but Griffin couldn't place them as having anything to do with skivers. The shelves mostly contained what appeared to be handmade models. A very detailed and lovely old sailing ship, its white sails dusty, an old-style internal combustion truck, a stubby little thing that looked vaguely aerodynamic but had no noticeable means of propulsion, and other objects lost in the shadows. Griffin walked forward, and the mechanic looked up. He appeared to be a bit over 40, with graying hair and a vigorous face. He grinned like Griffin was his best friend. "Hey, how's it going?" he boomed out. "Name's De Silva, John De Silva. How you doing?" "Good," said Griffin, taken aback by the man's enthusiasm. The mechanic pursed his lips for a moment. "Hey, haven't we met before?" Griffin peered at him. No, I don't think so." "Oh, sure we have." His voice had a Texas flavor to it, evoking images of good old boys in the dry desert. He waved a gold-tone object that he was holding in his left hand, and his brows knitted as he thought. He snapped his fingers and brightened. "On a transport flight into Fort Chicago." Griffin tilted his head. He'd flown into Fort Chicago just after enlisting, but there were so many people on that plane he couldn't have said anything about those who were right next to him. That was only a few days after Jenny's accident. He hadn't been very interested in anything then. The man snapped his fingers again, his face still intent. "You were going into basic!" A volley of finger snaps sounded from his right hand as the man cudgeled his memory. "You were flying from what?" The man snapped his fingers, then grinned again brightly. "From California." Yeah, right. What's your name?" "Griffin." "Right. Good to see you again. How you been? Hey, here, come look at this." The mechanic picked up a glass tube that was about 2 hands width high. It was narrow at the top and belled out toward the bottom. Both ends were capped with metal. He placed it onto the object he had been holding in his left hand, which was obviously its base. "You know what this is?" he said, looking like a cat with the family canary in its mouth. Griffin shrugged. "This is a lava lamp." The mechanic tapped it gently, almost lovingly. "This thing here is almost 100 years old. It's amazing the stuff they used to do." He smiled at it and shook his head. "This ran on alternating current electricity, at huge voltages." He looked into Griffin's eyes as though he expected him to know what he meant. "There was enough wind running through this thing to kill a man." Sharp nod. "I'm restoring it. Kind of a hobby." He set it back down on the workbench and lifted the glass part off the base to look at it. "I'm afraid the liquid part congealed a long time ago, and I'm not exactly sure what they used, so I'm gonna have to do a little experimenting to figure out what it was. I think," he tapped on the glass, "this is based on glycerin." "That's, great," said Griffin. "Hey, aren't you kind of taking a chance?" De Silva knit his eyebrows. "On what?" "Well, you know, working on personal stuff while you're on duty." "Ah, shit, no, they don't care." De Silva burst into laughter. "I got nothing else to do." "Yeah, listen, I was sort of wondering, where's the rest of the skivers?" The mechanic looked up from the broken lava lamp. "Rest of them?" he echoed. "What do you mean, rest of them?" "Yeah, there's only 2 out there, and I thought maybe..." "No, that's it." De Silva held up his toy, turning it in the light. "Nice, isn't it?" Yeah, it is. Listen, John, maybe they're at the other base?" De Silva put the toy down. "The what?" "The other station. I mean, this is just intake, isn't it? The rest of the skivers, they'll be at the other station." "I don't know about that." De Silva looked down at his toy, then back up at Griffin. "Hey, listen, you'd better skedaddle. You're not supposed to be back here. Off limits." He looked embarrassed. Griffin was baffled. Since when was a pilot barred from visiting the hangar? This base was weird. "But I'm a pilot." De Silva shrugged again, obviously uncomfortable, and wouldn't meet his eyes. Hey, I don't write the rules, I just follow them. You really ought to leave. He glanced up quickly. I mean, I could get in trouble too, you know. Griffin decided not to make a point of it, and the mechanic looked relieved as Griffin left the workshop. The door closed behind him. Michaels was right. This guy clearly had a lot of time for his hobbies. Kind of gave Griffin the creeps. He hadn't been on many bases, but it always seemed to him that mechanics generally had about 5 times as much work as they could possibly get done. They took their timeouts in deeply hidden corners where no one could find them, not just beyond an unlocked door. He looked again at the skiver as he walked through the large hangar. Michaels claimed this mechanic was a sign that they were being lied to. But about what and why? It just didn't make sense. Never mind that nonsense, he thought with sudden disgust. You didn't join Beatrice International to think, and Michaels could find trouble in a church, and probably had. Maybe he could log some more simulator time today. The Sarge said they should get at least 2 hours a day, either in real-time missions or simulations. He'd been sick up to here with the simulator when he got out this morning, but now the idea called to him. Kill those bugs. His heart beat faster. Yes.